Most mornings in the early 1980s began quietly. The kettle clicked on, the radio hummed in the corner, and the day eased itself awake without hurry. We dressed, ate, and stepped outside almost on autopilot, never imagining anything could be different. Yet somewhere between those familiar sounds and routines, something subtle was shifting, not with headlines or announcements, but in ways you only notice years later. When did breakfasts become quicker, walks become shorter, portions become larger? Looking back now, it's hard to believe how quickly everyday habits slipped away. Unnoticed at the time, quietly rewriting British life forever changed. Before the 1980s arrived, British life followed patterns that felt almost unbreakable. Days were shaped by routine rather than choice, and that structure quietly guided how people lived. Meals happened at familiar times, often around the same table, with portions that reflected availability rather than abundance. You ate what was cooked, and that was that. Movement wasn't something you scheduled or tracked. It was simply part of the day. Walking to the local shops, climbing stairs at work, carrying bags home, all folded naturally into life. Even leisure had a rhythm, built around outings, hobbies, and simple pastimes that rarely involved sitting still for long. There was comfort in this predictability. You knew when dinner would be ready, where your food came from, and how far you'd walk to fetch it. Compare that with today's world of constant convenience, endless choice, and speed, and the difference feels striking. Back then, these habits felt permanent, almost invisible. No one imagined they would fade, yet those steady routines were already preparing to loosen their grip. They shaped bodies and days alike, quietly setting limits without rules. Long before anyone thought to question how ordinary life itself could change for us all, then none of these changes arrived with fanfare. They slipped in gently, one after another, until daily life felt familiar, yet strangely altered. Most people didn't notice this happening at the time. The first shift was convenience. Larger supermarkets appeared, shelves filled with ready-made options, and meals that once took planning now took minutes. It didn't feel indulgent. It felt helpful. After long days, quicker choices simply made sense, and slowly the old kitchen routines loosened their hold. Work changed to quietly reshaping bodies without comment. More people found themselves behind desks, driving rather than walking, lifting paperwork instead of parcels. New tools reduced effort, saving time but also removing small movements that once filled the day. Fewer steps, fewer stairs, fewer reasons to break a sweat, all unnoticed. Then there were portions. Plates grew wider, packaging promised value. Servings expanded not dramatically, but steadily. Each year added a little more, until the idea of what looked normal quietly shifted. No announcement marked the moment. It just became how things were. Evenings transformed as well. Leisure moved indoors. Where nights once involved outings, hobbies, or hands-on pastimes, screens began to dominate. Sitting became the default way to relax, to unwind, to spend time together. It felt modern, comfortable, and entirely harmless. Finally, special treats lost their rarity. Items once saved for occasions became everyday companions, always within reach. Not excess, just availability. When something is always there, it stops feeling special and starts feeling routine. Taken alone, none of this seemed significant. Together, these small changes rewired British daily life. This single shift changed British life more than we realize, preparing the ground for consequences that would only become clear years later. It happened gradually, almost politely, like a tide creeping up a beach. Families adapted without discussion, workplaces without ceremony. There was no sense of loss because nothing had been officially taken away. Life was simply becoming easier, smoother, more efficient. Shops stayed open longer, cars replaced walks. Even children's routines shifted indoors, shaped by comfort and convenience. Each generation adjusted, assuming this was progress, because progress was what Britain had always done. Only later did patterns emerge. Clothes fitting differently, movement feeling optional rather than necessary. Habits once anchored in necessity, now driven by preference. Looking back, it becomes clear how these tiny adjustments stacked upon one another. What makes this period so fascinating is its innocence. No one set out to change bodies or health. These were side effects of modern living, unfolding quietly in ordinary homes across the country. And by the time anyone noticed, The new normal had already settled in, ready to be passed on to the next generation. And with that settled normal came questions no one yet knew how to ask. Why did days feel fuller, but bodies heavier? Why did effort fade from routine? Those answers were still forming, waiting for reflection, hindsight. And the moment Britain would finally pause and look back at last after years of unnoticed change and adjustment. It's tempting, looking back, to place blame on ourselves. To imagine that people simply became less disciplined, less careful, less something. But that misses the truth of it. This story was never about willpower. It was about surroundings. Britain didn't wake up one morning and decide to change. It slowly adapted to a faster, easier, more convenient world. Homes, workplaces, streets, and shops all shifted together, nudging behavior without anyone noticing. The body simply responded, doing what bodies have always done, adjusting to the environment they live in. There's something comforting in that realization. Nothing went wrong. No generation failed. Life just moved on, as it always does. Progress brought benefits, comfort, and choice, but it also quietly rewrote habits we once relied on without thinking. Understanding this replaces guilt with perspective and invites us to look back with empathy for past selves, navigating change they never saw coming quietly. What the 1980s left us with is awareness. Today, we talk openly about balance, movement, and routine in ways our parents never needed to. Yet there is value in remembering how life once quietly shaped us without effort. Perhaps the lesson isn't about returning to the past, but borrowing from it. Sometimes understanding the past isn't about blame, it's about clarity, and choosing which parts of yesterday still deserve a place today, now together.